All right, thank you everyone for being here. This presentation, it came from the Inland Empire, is kindly sponsored by the Moreno Valley Friends of the Library. This presentation will be recorded for you to view later on our YouTube page. If you have any questions for Larry, put them in the chat box and he will get to them at the end. I'll gather up your questions for you to give to him. So a few announcements before we begin. Our 2020 Summer Discovery Program for all ages started last week, and it's not too late to join in. You get to read and participate in activities and our virtual programs to earn online badges and online raffle tickets for a chance to win a grand prize at the end of the summer. For those of you who are registered for our Summer Discovery Program, here's a secret code to earn an online badge for attending this program. So let me put it in the chat box for you. So the Joshua Tree, all capital letters, no spaces. And here is the link for the Summer Discovery website for you to input your secret code and to register for our Summer Discovery Program. If you're not registered right now, you can still sign up and input the secret code later. Now I'll introduce our special guest, local author, Larry Burns. Larry Burns draws inspiration and ideas from the heady mixture of sights, sounds, peoples, and places of his hometown, Riverside, California. He is an active community leader, booster, and all-around fan of the recreation, entertainment, arts, and culture, ready to be discovered across the Inland Empire. He is a founding member of the Inlandia Institute, a nonprofit literary organization. He teaches English at Riverside City College and humanities at Southern New Hampshire University. Thank you for being here, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. And thank you to the Moreno Valley Friends of the Library. It's a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to be able to spend some time with you to talk about some of the people and places that I've found inspiration from over the years. And quite frankly, going into the research to create this book, I discovered many of these stories for the first time. And one of the things I hope people get out of this book is a better perspective of just how diverse and varied the people are of the Inland Empire. And if you're someone who's watching this and you live in the Inland Empire, I'm sure there's places that you're unfamiliar with given the size of this, this region and the fact that there's over 4 million of us. And also given the fact that we've had civilizations here for thousands of years, there's bound to be new places to experience and new stories to capture that, that hopefully people have not heard before. And one thing about the book I wanted to write is, some of the stories that people do know, but tell you a little bit, something a little bit different about them. And so that's one of the reasons why it's called Secret Inland Empire. Some of the things that are in this book are things that people are already familiar with, or things you drive by on a daily basis. And this book's designed to just showcase something a little unique and special about it. And in particular, designed to showcase something unique and special about the communities that these things exist in. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is because I grew up in the Inland Empire. I grew up in Chino, California. And then in my 20s, I moved to Riverside, California to find affordable housing and raise a family, just like a lot of people come to this region for, and have come to this region for a long time, and probably will continue to do so. So I wanted to tell the stories of this area in a way that I didn't find being told an awful lot. And going through, college, studying literature and studying cultures. In California, we study a lot of Los Angeles literature, but not a lot of Inland Empire literature, let's say, or the stories of the Inland Empire. So this is just one attempt to collect and share some of those stories. There's a number of good history and cultural history books about this area that I invite you to try and enjoy as well. So at the back of this book, I've got some of the places where I did my research, some of the people that I talked to. So many of those people I interviewed are authors and historians themselves, and tell much deeper stories than the ones I'm going to go into here. So I'm going to give you an introduction about the Inland Empire, and then I'm going to tell you about some of the places here in the following slides. And then at the end, we'll have some Q&A. And I look forward to hopefully learning a thing or two about these places that I didn't know about as well. A lot of people ask, where exactly is the Inland Empire? So rather than answer that question, this book attempts to share a picture of the Inland Empire that's based on our shared values, our experiences, and culture. Lines on a map offer little useful information. Borders are merely choices. And this book chooses to ignore those and instead cast a wide net to capture creative cultural expressions as diverse as the people of the Inland Empire. If, however, you prefer geographic maps over the philosophical ones, consider the Inland Empire to include Riverside and San Bernardino counties, and maybe a step or two beyond. Where is the Inland Empire? It's where you least expect it. And that's another surprise, and I hope that people find exciting and interesting, is just the ways in which the Inland Empire has impacted not only California, but the entire world. So this first piece is the hidden benefits of drinking fountains. These are the temperance fountains that were popular as part of the temperance movement at the early part of the last century as we worked towards prohibition of alcohol in this country. Some of the earlier efforts were designed to keep men out of bars in the first place. So the premise being men perhaps going to a bar merely because they're thirsty, they need a drink of water, and then they get sucked into, you know, having some of that devil's elixir, and then it all goes downhill from there. So the temperance movement began to build fountains outside of bars that were problematic for them. And this one here is in Ontario, California, and it's on the large median that runs down Euclid Avenue. It's currently at C Street. It's very unassuming. I've driven past it for years. I grew up in Chino and went to the library out here all the time and never realized it was there or what it was. It's actually a working fountain too, but be careful when you do use it. It doesn't spray like a traditional drinking fountain would, so heads up on that. The true original location was about 3 miles to the north, which was probably in front of a saloon, but I couldn't find that information during my research. There's another temperance fountain that is in Chino outside of their library too. So if you're a fan of libraries, you can make a library tour while you look at temperance fountains. That one's a reproduction. It's a lot nicer looking. It looks a lot fancier. But it was hit by, the original was hit by a driver. I'm not sure if it was a drunk driver, but it sure would be poetic if that was the case. So, and there's many more of those too. And I even, in my research too, I came to find out that the temperance movement still has an active membership in the Inland Empire with 104 members as of 2014, which I thought was a surprise. This is a little bit of kitsch that you may have noticed before driving along Route 66. This is the Wigwam Motel. I put it in the book because it really captures how our cultures use other cultures throughout history to make certain statements or to sell certain products or services in some cases. So this is what I think is a pretty good example of one culture using another culture's objects to create this new movement in motorhomes and motor lodgings that was taking place in the 1950s. These began to appear when people started traveling after World War II. And so these places began to spring up as really unique, one-of-a-kind attractions. And this is one of the few left, only one of two left of this chain that was originally part of the Wigwam Motel chains. Today, it's run by a family who is a big fan of not only these types of structures, but also other kitschy little secret places as well. So when I interviewed them to talk about the book, I was surprised to learn about some other secret places. And they said, hey, did you know about this little museum that's around the corner here? And so I was able to check out some new places I didn't find. And that was one of my experiences from the book. Oftentimes I would come to a location and I would sit down with the owners or proprietors or people who were fans of the place. And over time I would learn that they knew about some other really cool, kitschy, unusual spots. And that was one of the real joys of the book, was just all of these new discoveries that I got to make and these interesting people that I got to meet along the way. And too many that I couldn't simply fit into this book, but it was a recurring theme for me to speak to people who had a real passion for these places. They didn't just do it for the money. It wasn't just an investment. It was a real connection to their values and the things that they cared about and liked. And I think that's what really makes our community such a rich fabric. You know, there's a lot of variety here, a lot of disagreement, to put it mildly at times, but there's these overarching values to get by, do more with less, to care about the things that we have. to make do is something that all of us have experienced and can appreciate. This is a little bit of the hiking experiences you can have in the Inland Empire. I think one of the great untold stories and the things people outside of the Inland Empire do not realize is just how much outdoor recreation we have. It is stupendous. It is one of a kind. I get outside of the Inland Empire, and this is still one of the most beautiful places to hike around in. This is just one of the examples. I put it in the book because it's a little bit special. It's right outside. It's a part of Idlewild, which is a unique and special mountain community. And you know, there's literally dozens of mountain communities I could write about in this book. And I think Idlewild is really representative of it. For me personally, I took a really nice Father's Day hike with my sons a couple of years ago up this trail. So when I did the research for this book, so it has a lot of special meaning to me as well. And this is one place where I found one of the secrets of the Inland Empire I knew nothing about before. And this is something called a squirrel card. So if you're in a national forest and you run into one of the park rangers, one of the volunteers, they can administer to you what is known as the squirrel oath. And the squirrel oath basically, you say that you're going to protect the environment, you're not going to do any damage, you're going to tell people about the great things about the wilderness, and you're going to do everything you can to protect, I guess, basically the squirrels and everything else in the forest. And you take that oath, and it sounds a little bit silly, but you actually feel a bit serious near the end of that little oath that happens, and you affirm it, and then you get this little blue card. Mine's a little blue card signed by a park ranger, and I that's one of my finest souvenirs that I've collected in all my adventures around the Inland Empire, is that little squirrel card. So I'm happy to share the knowledge about the squirrel card, because as a person closing in on 50 years of age, I never knew that this was a thing. And the secret was revealed to me as we were ascending the hike. There was a foursome coming down in their 80s that was coming down at about 9:30 in the morning. So that means they probably left about before daylight. But they were making good time, and they told us about the secret of the squirrel card. So happy to share that along with you as well. This area also connects with the Coahuila Indian traditions, and Taquit's Peak has a lot of good connections with local history and mythology. So it connects not only to the present day, but also to a lot of the stories of our past. And one of the beautiful things about this spot is that it's so well protected that when repairs have to be done at this mountain lookout for fire season, they have to use hand tools. They can't use anything that could create a spark or uses a motor for all of the fire danger. So just another example of how the Inland Empire really looks out for the things that we have, because frankly, we don't have as much as most other areas do. I think as a result, we take better care of it. Speaking of taking better care of things, this is a great example of what you can do with garbage, with trash, with things that people have thrown away. And another great example of community. So this is Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch. And this is a place that the collection started with Elmer's father. And at some point in Elmer's adulthood, he decided we need to do more than just keep these stored in a garage. And he began to assemble them into these interesting presentations. And I hesitate on what to exactly call them. I mean, they look like Christmas trees made of glass bottles. And I think that's an accurate description. I referred to it as art when I met Elmer, and he said it was not art. He was not an artist. These are just things that he enjoyed and wanted to share. And I don't know how much of that was just him being a interesting, entertaining human being, or how much that was his authentic self. And I only met him the one time because shortly, about 6 months after the book was finished, he passed away. Now, in a great example of how community comes together, people like Elmer make these places all over the Inland Empire, and oftentimes they just fade away into the desert when they're done. They're a single generation. There's a man or a woman with a passion, and then that passion doesn't last. But Elmer's passion was contagious and infectious, and just meeting him one time, I could tell you he had an impact on everybody he touched, and so much so that a group of people in his community thought it best to save this place. And so they created a group, they organized, they raised funds, and now Elmer's Bottle Tree Ranch is open, just like it was before. So you can still enjoy all of the art, and you can still enjoy all of the great human interaction that can be found. And you can also take a ride along the old highway, or old Route 66 too. It's a nice restored, well-paved section of that road for you to enjoy, and this is a great place to stop along the way. This speaks to our artistic heritage and history and our inspiration for many great artists over the years. This is Spike, who you may know from Peanuts. Charles Schulz, who I did not know this at the time, did live in the Inland Empire. He lived in Needles, which is in the far upper right corner of the Inland Empire for most of our geographically challenged people like myself. The great thing about this little piece of art is that it is an officially commissioned piece that is sanctioned by the Schulz Foundation. And the person that is responsible for this is an individual named Joe Jones, who was a fan of the Peanuts strip and knew about the connection to this history here. So he petitioned to have this made. It was done. It was originally at the Needles Chamber of Commerce, but you're not able to access it there as much. So it is now currently housed at the subway station there, and it is open 24/7, 365 days a year. So right now, you are mere minutes or hours away from seeing this statue, should you choose to do so. So this is something you can do even right now, I believe. So something special and unique. He only lived here for a year, but the cactuses that are part of the background for all of these scenes came from the nearby mountains for this area. Desert of Misfit Toys. So this is Sunvale Village. This is a place that you can visit online on Facebook. You can just search for Sunvale Village. There's a public group that the artist Kathy Allen manages on a regular basis. The thing that I love about this place, and the book really doesn't do it justice because the book came out a year ago, and I visited Kathy 6 months before that, and she continuously upgrades this art. This is something that changes all of the time. And for those of you who are fans of desert art, you know this is a fact. When you build something in the desert, it doesn't stay where it's supposed to. It doesn't stay in the shape it's supposed to for very long. It gets affected, let's say, by wind and rain and people and animals and all kinds of good stuff, things that can be really informing to art. And so Kathy's created this special place for basically things that have been dumped in the desert. And so she's found a more positive and useful way to put these things to use. And she fills these places with a lot of cultural references and little inside jokes and fun little connections to art and history and culture that you'll find entertaining and fun. And along the way too, you've got some really interesting structures. So these little structures are created from the trash that she finds, and then they are built to house people, you know, these toys that are rescued from these dump sites that are then given a second life or a new chapter in their life, connected in some way or fashion to what their original design was. So each one of these places has a story. Each one of the people in these has a story. You can walk this at your leisure. There's also some additional art that's been added there. I believe there's last time I visited a few months ago, there was a labyrinth as well. And so this is a place that you can visit also to, you know, safe for social distancing any time of the year, because you're on 5 acres and you've got these little installations along a noted walking path. So you can see quite a bit of this in a reasonable amount of time as well. And like I said, it's constantly changing and evolving. So this is a place that you could come back to time and time again. And you can enjoy it online or you can enjoy it in person. So it's the best of both here. This was a pleasant surprise, and one of the things I learned, this is the Maloof home. And so this is Sam Maloof's home and workshop. And I did not know this as somebody who grew up in Chino, and I should talk to my grade school teachers about this fact. I didn't know Sam Maloof was born and raised in Chino, California. So when I first learned about Sam Maloof, I thought he was such a great artist and individual and a craftsman. I thought he was from Los Angeles, you know, to be honest. And so to learn that someone of his stature and someone of his impact was from the Inland Empire just reminded me, even someone who really appreciates this place, that we really have to share these stories, because it's very easy for us to assume greatness doesn't automatically come from here, and greatness has come from here. This man changed custom furniture making and woodworking in his own lifetime. And he did a lot of other wonderful things too, which you can see at this museum. The cool thing about this place is that it was originally located where the 210 freeway now flies through the Inland Empire, helping all of us move from our jobs and our places and our things. And when it had to be moved, it actually didn't have to be moved because it is on a National Register of Historic Places. It's one of the few places that cannot be moved by eminent domain. So the people designing this 210 freeway had to come up with an alternative, which would have destroyed upwards of another 150 homes. So with the offer from the Maloof family to move this historic place a few miles north to where it sits today, they saved a big part of their original community, and they preserved a really important aspect of our community that has impacted the entire world and the arts community. So you have both of these things preserved in our community. It again speaks to that theme that I saw throughout the places I visited, that we preserve and care about the things that we've built, because we don't get a chance to build an awful lot given the limitations here. And when it comes to the things that we care about, we try to preserve them in a way that protects others as well. We're not exclusive. We're a loosely knit community of dozens and hundreds of communities. And so we understand that the things we do here impact other places. And that usually works out for the better, I found, in terms of economics, in terms of social issues, and other things. This is another great place, also happens to be in Chino, California. This is Plains of Fame, and it has one-of-a-kind artifacts and airplanes that you won't find anywhere else, and frankly, you won't find flying anywhere else. So this is one of the only places in the world you're going to find a Zero, the one the kamikaze pilots, Japanese pilots in World War II used to use. This was one that was recovered from an attack and is still flown to this day. What you see right here is a flying wing, which is and was one of the last of its kind in the world. This was a top secret military project, and then it became much more publicly known, and so they began to destroy these as quickly as they could. So this was one of the last flying wings of its kind, and it was in regular flight too. And then about a year ago, it was in flight, and they had some mechanical trouble, and it crashed, and the pilot died, and of course the plane was completely destroyed. So I'm really grateful that I was able to capture this picture, and I was really grateful I was able to learn this story, again, as somebody who grew up in Chino and had been to the Chino airport many times. I didn't understand this history, and I didn't understand the other great part of this history is that this is where over 10,000 troops trained during World War II, including a secret Tokyo raid that took place in April of 1942 that I didn't even know about until, again, I began to research this book. So one of the joys of researching books is not just telling stories about things you knew already, but telling all of the cool stories about stuff you didn't even know before. So again, I hope you find lots of places to enjoy and discover for yourself, because that was one of the true discoveries I made, is that there's an endless amount of things and people you can meet and understand better in the Inland Empire. This is another place that is pretty unique and special. It's inside the old Hemet Opera House, so it has a lot of history there in itself. And this place, in addition to holding one of the international experts in Victorian era cultural practices and Victorian dress, they make reproductions of Victorian era dresses. And this little museum too gives you a piece of history that I found very interesting, in particular the connection between the values and dress of the Victorian era and the Civil War era. On both sides of the Civil War, the North and the South, both their upper echelons and aristocrats enjoyed very similar cultures, dresses. Most of the dresses here are examples from the Civil War, wives of generals and other high-ranking officials from that period. So you can understand a little bit of American history. You can also understand how that connects with England's history and other types of history, and also the history of these dresses and what they represent. And this is another gem, another internationally known expert that has, Eve Faulkner has this little shop right here in Hemet and has for many years. This is a really cool museum that is on one of our nearby, our Inland Empire Indian reservations. This is the Malky Museum. The thing that makes it special is in 1964, this became the first museum in California to be created by for Native Americans. And for many years, this was just a private collection of Jane Penn's and Dr. Catherine Siva Sobel's putting this together little bits and pieces over the years until they could finally acquire the space and acquire the resources to house all of these things appropriately. The funnest part about this place is the Ethno-Botanical Garden, where you have examples of all of the plants that the early settlers to this area, the people that were here thousands of years ago, and also the Indian tribes that were forcibly moved here, managed to hold on to and maintain. So this, what's left in these gardens just represents important aspects of cultures, many cultures that are from here, also cultures that were brought here. And these were all different plants that helped people survive in this area, to patch a roof, to feed a family or diaper a baby. Whatever the human need was, these plants were protected and saved in order to protect and save the people who created this museum and now give us the space to enjoy today. So it's an important connection to our roots, and it's an important identifier to where we're going in the future. This place not only houses the museum, but it also houses a publisher. So they're printing the voices and the stories of this region as well. This is a nice little piece of peace of mind, I guess, along Highway 395 near Interstate 15. And again, it really connects to the varied cultures and histories that come here. It would seem strange that a Buddhist temple would be placed in the middle of the Inland Empire. But when you talk to the people who use this temple, it makes perfect sense because they have large communities of Buddhists in Los Angeles and San Diego. And we are then centrally located. Not many people talk about how the Inland Empire is centrally located, but I would like to point that out, that the peoples of Los Angeles and San Diego counties in some respects certainly do see us as centrally located. This is a great place too. If you're not a Vietnamese Buddhist or a Buddhist, you'll feel very welcomed. It's open every single day of the year, except for 1 or 2 days of the year where they have special holidays. You can check ahead, but when you walk in, you're able to walk around the grounds. You can walk inside the temples unless there's a service going on. And for those of you who have maybe a Judeo-Christian background instead of a Eastern religious background, when you walk into the temple, the way to understand the histories a little bit is just to look around at the stained glass windows along the edges. If you've been into a traditional Judeo-Christian church, you would see those images in a church, and you can read them the same way in these temples. So it's a way to access a culture maybe most people may not be readily familiar with. It's also a beautiful stop along Highway 395. So when I went up to Mammoth, stop here, rub a little sage on our hands and walk through the giant statue garden. It's very refreshing and relaxing, and then you jump back on that road for the rest of your trip around the Inland Empire. This really speaks to some of the things that we're able to build in the area. Adobe Modern at Cal Earth. So this is a way to build modern structures out of existing materials, couple $1,000s to build these houses, and they can withstand, or they meet the earthquake standards of the state of California. So they can be Wi-Fi accessible. They can, you can have all the bells and whistles on them that you want, but a very minimal locally sourced materials. So not a way everybody wants to build, but an alternative to many of the ways in which people choose to live. Again, speaks to our diversity. I'm going to just jump here to a couple more. This really speaks to our connection to the world and something special that we did. I'm going to read you this story because I want to give you just one story, one example of how the Inland Empire has literally changed the world. What fueled the citrus boom? Water and electricity. Welcome to the first hydroelectric plant built in North America. If asked to guess the location, people would often pick a place farther east and sometimes picturesque like Niagara Falls. But no, it's right here in the Inland Empire. This 800 kilowatt plant, tiny by today's standards, was the first hydro facility in the world to commercially generate three-phase alternating current power. Why did that matter in the 1890s? Prior to this achievement, the only way to get that large amount of electricity was to use direct current. The limitation was direct current. It could only go about 5 miles from its generation source. So imagine a world run on electricity that had to be generated every 5 miles. And you'll appreciate the impact of this innovation. Electrical engineer Almarian Decker was brought in to overcome many obstacles involved in this challenge. First, no motors at the time could handle this feat, so he literally had to invent new motors. Using experimental models of rotating magnetic fields developed by the more famous inventor Nikola Tesla, Decker created a system so out of the box that Westinghouse refused to build them. A new upstart power company, General Electric, agreed to give it a try. That's another example of what's possible when there's significant need and few people with the vision to carry it out. And because of this, Redlands had tons of ice, which kept the citrus fresh and cold for its long journey train ride to the East Coast. Sadly, Decker died a month before the electricity started to flow. The location continued to fuel the Redlands citrus industry until 1934, when it was replaced by a bigger and better piece of equipment. Today, 90% of the power generated in the world is created by the methods that were first introduced right here in the Inland Empire. You can't get much of a bigger impact than that. It looks exactly as it did in 1893 here. This is a good replica, or this is a good restoration, a good management of this site. As you drive through Mentone on Highway 38, if you're heading north, you just look to your left and you see a nondescript looking house with a fence around in the middle of the lake bed or the riverbed. That's the place. It's okay to get to. I would recommend parking on the side of 38 and walking the 300 yards to it. It's a much better walk and save your car the trouble. And go early in the morning. You can enjoy the nice walk as well along the dry riverbed. I'm going to pause there. There's a couple more pieces, but like I said, I can talk more in the chat through some Q&A about particular places that I didn't get to, or even some other places that people have discovered. So Charmaine, are we ready to take questions, or where are we?
Sure, if you're ready to take some questions, we can. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. I guess I have a question for you, Larry. Do you have a favorite, I guess like a fast food or restaurant that's unique to the Inland Empire, like a hidden gem kind of restaurant that you could recommend to us?
Oh, well, oh goodness, I'm drawing a blank on the fresh food place. It's a burger. My goodness, it's a unique burger place. They only have about 5 locations right now. Gosh, I'd say people might not realize that Farmer Boys is out of Riverside, California, and that's now expanding even out of the state of California. So that's pretty significant. That would probably be my go-to because they have such a good variety of food there too. It's a family business that started with 5 brothers. So that's another cool Inland Empire success story. But if people like fast food, they can still go to the original McDonald's up there on 14th and in San Bernardino. And even better than the original McDonald's is the wraparound mural around it. That thing captures almost all the stories that I put in the book, plus dozens of other pieces of history. It's a real gem. You can just spend hours walking around, and you can bump into famous and infamous artists there as well.
I actually haven't been to the original McDonald's.
No, yeah, it's the very first one.
I know I should get around to going there.
Yeah, it's and it's owned by a famous chain from here is Juan Pollo too. That's also a San Bernardino product specifically.
Wow.
So.
Did not know that.
Yes.
All right. Did anyone else have any questions for Larry? Anything that he didn't get to discuss? Anything you're dying to hear about?
I could, if nobody has a question, I would love to share the story of Dr. June McCarroll.
Sure, that would be great.
It's my favorite story of all of the stories that I picked up in my research. So, and there's some dispute over the facts of this. I know there's some historians in Redlands that have some good evidence about the start of the White Dividing Line. But this is a story about the White Dividing Line, but also about healthcare in the Inland Empire, and specifically, medical doctors for this area. So I'm going to read her story. So how did a White Dividing Line become a standard practice on highways? The Inland Empire has one of the most acute doctor shortages in the country, a situation that has long existed, and I think we would agree is continuing to this very day. So India was particularly happy to see June McCarroll, MD, arrive in the early part of the 19th century. After a distinguished medical career, she had just followed her husband here, apparently intending to become a prairie wife and not a whole lot else. But she saw an acute need for physicians, particularly by the very poorest who worked in the fields and had little access to modern conveniences, and that prompted her to jump in and help. So to provide care to those in need, she often took to driving around the desert, and she took her 6-shooter and her surgeon's tools everywhere she went. That's how one night she found herself on a dark stretch of our highway, facing a freight truck, barreling down the center of Indio Boulevard. Forced off the road, she sustained minor injuries that gave rise to a lingering question. How can we prevent head-on collisions? The clever medical doctor's solution was simple and direct, which describes the kind of medicine she became famous for. What about painting a white line down the center of the highway so everybody knows where to drive? It's amazing that that didn't already exist before she had that, that wonderful insight. Those in power, not surprisingly, didn't appreciate her vision. The local chamber and the board of supervisors heard her idea, and they quickly rejected this woman's advice. But she persisted, leaving that meeting and immediately painting a mile of the Indio Boulevard Road herself by hand at night. A campaign began, catching the attention of the newly formed California Highway Commission. The commissioners loved that idea. They formalized it in 1917, the center white line as the road design for the state of California. And as is often the case with ideas that initiated in California, the world adopted the practice soon after. So it's just another wonderful example of a local product coming to the aid of a very basic human local problem, and it wound up affecting the entire world. And that wasn't the only great thing she did. She saved thousands of people from the effects of tuberculosis. She opened the first library in India to serve those tuberculosis patients who were resting for several months and needed things to read and stuff to do. So this is a single individual that made a huge impact in our little inland empire. And she really represents to me just a fitting example of what all of us are capable of and what we could possibly do to make a difference. We don't have to limit ourselves to one particular thing either. You know, she excelled in medical, and she helped with transportation, and I'm sure she helped out in many other ways. She probably gave good advice on how to shoot a gun straight too. It wouldn't surprise me. So she represents something that's really special about the Inland Empire, is just these jack of all trades, these multifaceted human beings who wind up giving a lot more to our community, a lot more to the world than they actually take out of it. You know, Dr. June McCarroll didn't become rich and famous. She became moderately famous, and she's got a couple of statues and signs to her name. But I would love to continue telling her story. It's a fascinating tale. It's one that's worth telling, one that's worth sharing, and one that's worth copying, frankly. So I'm glad I had a chance to stop with that story. That she's I really enjoyed meeting her.
Thanks, Larry. That was really awesome. So we do have 2 questions from our audience. The first one is, my wife and I love discovering new places. What other places would you recommend for dates? So any romantic date spots in the Inland Empire or Riverside that you could recommend?
I would say it's warming up, but I'm a big fan of the deserts, and I always have a good time out in the desert. It's romantic, especially if you're with one other person. You know, if you're unfamiliar with the terrain, sometimes you feel like you've got to be closer. So that can be exciting. And being out in the desert really makes you think of your place in the world differently. So if you're with somebody like that. One of the trips I actually wanted to do right before the pandemic started was to go visit Pioneer Town and then do one of the sound baths. The sound bath place is not open yet, but places like Pioneer Town, where you can go stay in a very small, there's 10 rooms in that motel. You can stay in those types of places. You could be isolated. You can take really quiet hikes in the areas right above it. And you can also get into town, you know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes away for basic services and things like that. So an escape to Pioneer Town might not be a bad idea right now. If you're looking for day trips, Sunvale Village, like I mentioned, is a good spot, but the Noah Purefoy Outdoor Art Museum is another great place, in Joshua Tree as well, that you can access not 24/7, but every day of the year. And given the spacing and it's outdoors, the social distancing and the safety is at its best. So I would suggest places like that. And then one that's not in the book too is the bathtub gallery out in 62 as well.
Thanks for the recommendations. So you have one last question from Rebecca. She asked, what is your favorite aspect of writing your book and what drove you to write it?
I would say the favorite part of the book was discovering the things I didn't know from the stories that people were telling me. So it was really fascinating for me to have this realization that there's these human beings with all of these stories in their heads. And they're not even old people necessarily, but they know all of these neat things about us, these oral histories that aren't written down or aren't really told in a complete way anywhere. And so one of the neat things we can experience as human beings, I've realized, is that we can go to these places and we meet like-minded people. If you go to a place, odds are people of similar thinking might also be there. And if you can manage to strike up a conversation with one or two of them over the course of a couple of hours in that place, that's really what I find to be transformative about these places. It's not just the physical surroundings. You can go see rocks. You can go see Samuelson rocks. They're all rocks, but it's the humans that are there. It's the stories that you can catch while you're there in these beautiful, neat places at the same time. So I'm really struck with the combination of those things that you can find in the Inland Empire. So that's why I wanted to write the book, because I wanted to celebrate those things and hopefully find other people who also see that stuff and want to tell those stories.
That's really awesome, Larry. Well, thank you so much. So
Thank you.
everyone, I put the ordering information for Larry's books. He wrote a book, Secret Inland Empire, and he also wrote another book about things to do in Riverside. So the phone and fax and the email information is on there. And Larry, what are your social media platforms so everyone can follow you?
Oh yeah, you can find me at Larry Mark Burns on Facebook and Instagram. That's typically where I'm hanging out. And then the books, of course, you can find on Barnes & Noble online. Most of the Barnes & Nobles in SoCal carry it as well physically, Amazon. And then your indie booksellers are a place online that I really recommend. And if you're in Riverside, Celador Books. Just want to say they're a great supporter of local literature and local writers. Made Shop in Riverside. Those are two that have been really helpful to me. So locally, those are places, but of course, all the online resources as well. So thank you, and I hope to interact with some of you later on in those places too.
Thank you so much, everyone. And also our library, Moreno Valley Public Library, we're ordering copies of Larry's book, so you can find it through there too. Thank you so much, Larry. It's been really interesting. We can't wait to visit these places. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.